All right, colony collapse disorder. What in the world is that? Well, it's called a disorder because we really don't know right now, point blank, what it is. We would call it a disease if it had a causative agent. We know that mice, like the varroa mite, are real important in this. And we also know that all these other things can be factors, can be part of the puzzle. Because it just basically, but we're still learning. What happened with this is that it occurred in some migratory bee operations. So that's another factor because the beekeeper was a very movable. They moved their colonies all the way up from Florida to Maine and out in some other areas. And imagine if you had to move your household every 3 or 4 weeks, how disruptive that would be and stressful on you. And I think it's stressful on the bees too. They have to reorient and everything else to their surroundings. And I think that movement, and so there is a study being done by the USDA now to monitor migratory operations and see if the migratory component is important or not. Is that really causing enough stress to cause CCD or be a part of it? Most people would say it's a combination of everything. Everything up there and then some. And I could add for diseases, we'd have to add viruses, bacteria, fungi. Bees have a myriad of different things that can affect them. And it's kind of like I do have a part of my class where I talk about, I call it Morse the gloom and doom because it's telling you something you may or may not get. The chances are extremely high you're going to have mites. If you have bees, you have mites. So you have to know how to deal with the varroa mite. And you as organic gardeners, if you're considering doing that and following the same way, it's a real debate whether you can even have organic bees. I'm kind of hardcore that you can't, but I'm willing to be convinced. And why? Because the bee flight range is 5 miles. In order to be completely organic, you would have to have nothing that's sprayed by any kind of pesticide, and this means organic or not, for 5 miles, unless it was, quote, approved by something. So that's where we end up with the gray area that we're going to sort out in the future. But I'm a big proponent of going as far to that as we can. So I'm not, see where I'm coming from? I'm saying, I don't think it's possible to say pure blank 0.0 organic, but man, I'd love to have them that way because I don't want to use chemicals of any kind in my colonies. And we've gone from being the beekeepers of being poo-pooing all growers that use pesticides because then it could kill our bees to being something where we really need to use some of these acaricides, miticides, for killing bees in our colonies. And I say in the past, most beekeepers, when the varroa first came here about 1990, everybody was using Apistan. That in the right corner up there, that's an Apistan strip. What beekeepers really like about it is it's a fluvalinate impregnated, it's a pyrethroid impregnated plastic strip that you just slide in between the frames, and you put about 2 of those in a colony, and that would kill the mites great, with 98% death of mites. But we didn't really realize, and you could expect, eventually the mites became resistant. That was the only product we used for 10 years. And then we found out some of the bad news, that this material could basically accumulate in wax in the beehive, and maybe causing a sublethal effect by being, not killing the bees outright, but maybe causing some negative on developing of larvae in the comb that are contaminated by chemicals. And beekeepers are pretty good about not treating when they're making honey, but we've got to be even more careful the way I see that, because you really don't want to contaminate your combs. Most of beekeeping is going away from chemicals, thank goodness. And that's a neat thing. They're trying to, in a way, it makes sense. Some of them have no choice because they've used everything they could. They've run out of options. Isn't that kind of a funny turnaround? They've got to go organic or go somewhere softer. That's what I'd like to call it, softer, because they've already blown the system out. They've used illegal chemicals and the mites are resistant to them, so nothing works. We're now having a big effort of what we call survivor colonies in the United States, where the different groups, the regional groups, getting into breeding programs, where you're breeding a bee that will be adaptable to Tennessee and resistant to these mites, or substantially enough, if you add other tactics without chemicals, you maybe have a cumulative effect of not needing to treat or not using chemicals and still surviving. Some of that requires your willingness to put up with a little bit of loss every year. That's going to happen. I know beekeepers have started a program like not treating with any chemicals, and it took them 5 years to get to a point where they got to a plateau, where now they're still having losses, but they're not huge like they started out. 75, 85% of their bees went down to 70s, 60, 40, 25. 25 they may be able to put up with, but 75, 80 is too many. What other kind of commodity can you think of that would put up with that kind of loss? Not much, but we're concerned. And so all these factors can be part of the puzzle. Big time important. Billions of dollars in the United States, and Tennessee can probably, say you can double that figure now. The slide's a little bit old, and I'd kick annual crop value in the United States to about 18 billion. But big money. Anybody knows what kind of trees those are behind there? That requires more bees than any other commodity or crop for bees in the world. Almonds, or as I call them, almonds. Because when they harvest the nuts out of the tree, they shake the L out of it. I'm sorry. I was in Davis too long, you're right, and I worked in the almonds. And I learned, I had a lot of fun there while I was there. That's how I started in the almond orchards. And it was pretty idyllic when you went out in the morning, but you're talking, they bloom, they're coming into the middle of January and February, they're getting into bloom. They're springtime. It's going to be alternate wet. So your combination of one day is be beautiful and gorgeous, and the next day you got a huge downpour, kind of like we've had on and off here, but it's really something special to just be in the orchard and you can hear the bees. You know, that's a neat way to do it. And if you have orchards and you've been there, you know what I'm talking about, and you can get there. That's not a problem. Everything in the baskets requires a benefit substantially. If not for production of the commodity crop itself, pictured there, the seeds for them. Seed industry is a big industry too. Like a lot of your coal crops there, onions require a lot of bees to pollinate because they produce high potassium in the nectar, and the bees don't really like that as much. So you need to put more bees in them. Certain of the fruit trees, you need to time when you put the bees in and when you don't to fool the bees, because things like pears have very low sugars in the nectars, and the bees will go somewhere else where they can get more sugar. And so you wait until the crop has bloomed farther, and then you put the bees in right away, and the bees will check it out. The bees will go to the pears, and they go enough to set your crop before they take off and go back to clover that's growing along the roadside or someplace. Okay, this is just some of the stats, and I'm going to whip through these things. These are kind of boring slides. All it does show you, and there's some kind of a speculation, do we even have a problem? Is CCD something that somebody invented? Is it really occurring? Because if you look at the different times of these, the steepness of the curve, and look where some of the mites started coming in, were a long time ago. CCD happened way over to the right side of the curve. So it's not as steep a decline as it's, and this is in Indiana, comparing a friend of mine from Purdue, some data that he accumulated. And Tennessee would be pretty close to that, I believe. And so the symptoms, what we see, if we don't know what this is, and what are we seeing? The bees seem to fail to return to the hive. There's not very many dead bees present. You don't see piles of dead bees underneath the frames or in front of your hive. That could indicate a pesticide kill. You end up with a small cluster of adults, okay, and the queen, and the colony losses are real quick. And another thing you have happen is that the ratio changes from having 2 times as much area covered by adult bees as covered by brood. Brood is like, this brown stuff here are capped brood cells. underneath the pupal bee is developing. So this will be called a brood area. And if in a normal colony, this would be entirely covered by bees to incubate at 95 degrees. When you had CCD, you'd see they wouldn't cover it as well. There's something happening, and especially to the adults. There's a picture of a queen here and some workers around her and a developing larva there in a cell. Okay, and initially when this came out, there were some, what I would call alarmists in this whole thing, that they put a website out like they're doing some good, and then they wanted to make a map of everywhere CCD had. But the characteristics and what did you have to be included in this map was one beekeeper thinking that he may or she may have CCD. No real proof, just I think I have it. They may not have a clue, but they called in and put their 2 cents worth in. So Tennessee is colored over, and I don't buy it. I don't think we have CCD here as such, because most of the colony losses we've had, we can come up with a reason for them. So I'd say if we have CCD, I don't think it's as pronounced as some of the other areas. Some of the other states where it's first discovered, especially Pennsylvania, New York, and this whole region through here had some of it down into Florida. And Florida is a major place for bee activity. California is. A lot of people move their bees to the Dakotas in the earlier time of the year, and then move them south into Arkansas, Mississippi, these areas to overwinter. Okay, and then you also have quite a bit of beekeeping in the Pacific Northwest. But the question is, if one beekeeper said they have CCD, then you got colored in your state. I don't think it was that. Some people would say that most colony losses were probably due to varroa mites. And then if you compared the time during CCD, it was almost the same amount, maybe a little bit more. So is it real or not? Well, I'm not going to go farther on it, but does it really matter? What we did see that we really need to look at is that we found some new symptoms that we hadn't seen before, and that we really need to follow up on that. Because even though I don't think we had CCD in Tennessee, I want to know about what this thing is so I can do something about it before we get it in Tennessee. And so I'm part of a national team to do that. The possible causes, I talked a little bit about it, and I'm going to just gloss this because you guys want to hear about organic farming and not bees. There are existing parasites, certainly the mites. The mites themselves can outright kill your colony, but I think they're moving other things. They have a potential to move other things around. Viruses, bacteria. Poor nutrition is also a main factor. We're finding that all pollens are not created equal. And we have capabilities now with science, which is interesting, that we didn't have before. I always had this, I was taught, hey, Tennessee, you don't need to put any pollen supplements on because we have pollen year round. We do, excuse me. But is it really that nutritional, and what if we add a little bit, would that help? So I plan on looking at nutrition here a little bit more in the future. Do we have a lack of genetic diversity? Because bees were brought to North America by settlers coming from both West Coast and East Coast. Okay, and the idea is, do we have that genetic diversity we really need to combat something like this? Are bees too inbred? And so we've got a team of geneticists looking at this to see, how diverse are our bees? Because when you're starting breeding programs, you really need to start from a very, very diverse stocks to avoid inbreeding. So we're looking at it from two angles. Some geneticists are trying to select for bees that are resistant to mites and other things by looking at traits. Other people are looking at genetic diversity and trying to make sure that the building blocks you start with aren't too close together. And I think both of those are important. Stress in adult bees, transportation, overcrowding, environmental changes. Last year was one of the worst beekeeping years, certainly in my 20 years here in Tennessee. Okay, we didn't make that much honey at all. We had a severe problem with European foul brood, which I hadn't seen in 20 years, that killed 25 colonies. And the idea was it was my job to see what's going to happen. Well, I hated to wait to watch it happen, but it did. And we had to treat with an antibiotic, which I'd sworn off, because I had to have the colonies alive. It was important for 2 graduate student careers, and they might have hung me out to dry if I didn't do it. So anyway, but still, I didn't use the chemical until I had to, until I was forced to. And it was only that time. And not if things are even out this year, I'm not treating at all this year, okay? I don't believe in preventative treatments for things. Chemical contamination. This is another issue. We're studying pesticide-related things, and we may be involved in the future in a bigger study as part of a bigger team to look at pesticide contamination, because we found out there's some synergism or more than a double effect of treating bees with certain compounds in the hive and their bees' exposure to pesticides in crops that they're visiting. And that's a pretty interesting thing to look at. We need to know more. And we need to reduce the chemical contamination. There's a coumaphos strip out that came out after apistan strips. It's white. It's an organophosphate. I don't recommend using it. It's legal, but it's not my recommendation because it's just, to me, it's too prone to contamination. That's what the mites look like. I'm going to go through this kind of quick. Rather look at pollination-related things, but like any kind of a deal where you're dealing with a pest system, you're trying to use an integrated approach, which you have to use monitoring so you know what's in your hive, how many of these mites are in your hive. So we use a sticky board, and there you can do other approaches too. And I've got one of these up here that you can look at later. But what I'm going to pass around now, these don't have anything on them that can hurt you. So, all these little objects that look like seeds are varroa mites that are on these little plastic papers that were basically part of this. We got sticky shelf liner, build a frame, put the sticky shelf liner facing up, got screen wire to keep the bees from sticking to it. And this kind of shows you all those little things look like seed or varroa mites. And they will naturally drop off the colonies, the bees, whether they're clumsy or not, or they're being groomed possibly in a potential form of grooming behavior that will get them off their bodies. Okay, and basically, so a sticky board is a monitoring tool. It's to find out how many mites you have. You put it in for 3 days, divide it by 3, and if you've got greater than 25 mites fall over a daily period, then you need to treat or do something, or it's at least telling you that you've got some mite problems. It's giving you a choice. Okay, the CCD samples, and this came out in Science magazine pretty fast. We had some new viruses. And we also had, these are viruses, Israeli acute, and another one here, and Nosema apis and Nosema serrana are two nosemas. They are protozoan, and this is the one we were, quote, used to seeing. For many years, it was just a spring malady, wouldn't kill a colony. Some spores in the springtime give them a dysentery-like effect of spotting on the front of the colony. But then we got a new species of Nosema that a lot of people feel is maybe one of the big guns in this CCD, Nosema serrani. It came from the Asian honeybee, Apis serrani. And basically, this one produces much more spores than the other does. And it produces that quantity of spores. We don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound good to me. And my other student that was here a little while ago, Paul, is right now starting doing a histopathology work where he's looking at the guts of bees and comparing the amounts of spore production to what is actually happening with the disease, and to determine and compare these two, Nosema apis, Nosema serrani, to learn more about this thing so we can figure out what to do about it. And then there's some controversial stuff where, some people say that the Israeli acute virus was it, but then others say, well, it was here before. And so does that really, right or wrong? And curiously enough, see, in Israel, this isn't a problem. But then you wonder, well, okay, I'd say, what about some kind of mutation or some different strain that's affecting the other bees differently? So nosema, it's a concern. This is actually a biological fumagillin that you can use to treat for it. What are we doing about it? Well, we basically started a group of people, 35 of us from 23 states, and it resulted in us putting together a coordinated project, CAP project, that we basically went for $4.1 million over 4 years. And with our objectives to determine the cause, involve a number of different parts of this puzzle. To look at pathogens and parasites, environmental factors, pesticides and nutrition, also and deal with breeding, because I would love to have, if we had bees that were resistant, we wouldn't need to treat with anything. Another part of the original plan, which ended up getting thrown out, much to our chagrin, that's another long story, conserve non-apis pollinators, okay, because all pollinators are important. And the extension component, where we can translate what's being done with the research into terms that people can understand. And that's basically what they put me in charge of. So I got basically coerced by my colleagues to do that, and they promised they would help, and they have been. So they didn't lie. And so we put together a new system, a new community practice called Bee Health in e-extension, which is basically the extension service answer to World Wide Web information that's research-based. And Michael Wilson is one of the gurus of this. He's also an IT specialist. He works half-time for me on this project and half-time for main campus, as well as being a full-time student and a father and everything else. I don't know how you do it, Michael, but anyway, thank goodness for him, because he's big help in this whole project. We've got a lot of information, so there's a lot of information that you can glean now. Well, that's a honey house, but I had to take the picture of that because I just thought that was the coolest outhouse I'd ever seen. But anyway, and our website, basically, I've got some business cards I'll pass out to you later that'll have our website on it for UT. And it's is it? And it's also, excuse me, it's on my list, the little one-pager that I passed out to you. If you go to there, then you'll get the link to e-extension and several other places that you can pick up some good information if you're interested in bees. And on the bee, this is Bee Health. It's not called Honeybee Health for a good reason. We also have information on native bees. So there's information on native bees, information on honeybees, and I encourage you to go to that and check it out to get more information on this.
Is there any place on Earth that doesn't have a bee population and therefore a bee problem that we're aware of?
Probably Greenland. Antarctica. No, but you really have to, but we had to go, you got to go a stretch to find something that doesn't have some kind of a challenge, but then you can say that about many, many other things too, not just bees. You know, it's a challenge all over. Okay, anybody have any idea where the Worcester County Beekeepers Association is? Yeah? Good guess. That's the oldest beekeeping, one of the oldest beekeeping clubs in the country. So I got a chance to go there, and that's why I changed my title of the talk for them. I better. But anyhow, it was a good group. It was a lot of fun. pollination, I call it the grand interaction. And there's a good reason for that. Those are both my kids. She's the one just had her wedding shower. She's 22 now, and he's 19, going on 5. But anyway, they're both carving that jack-o'-lantern, having a blast doing it. And, you know, you look at all the other values of things like that. We wouldn't have pumpkins if we didn't have bees to pollinate them. And those kids sure had a blast getting all messy and doing that. That's our state tree. Anybody know what that is? Yeah. And it has really pretty flowers with the orange. The volunteer nectar guides. Put that on there. I don't know why I put that in there. Dunkin' Donuts. Well, maybe we'll find out what that is later on. Well, let's see. They have I think they might have Dunkin' Donuts in Massachusetts. Okay. I can't say as I've ever stopped at one, but they have Starbucks there too, I think. And you brought up a question earlier, and I wanted to save this slide for that because you want to know, well, why? How can you tell if you didn't have enough pollination? Well, the definition of pollination is transfer of pollen from point A, which is this is up close and personal in a male zucchini squash, to a female zucchini squash. And they are 2 separate flowers. It's like the males have a thin stalk that comes up ways above the stem. The female's subtended down lower flowers, okay? And there's no pollen in the female, so it cannot set a fruit unless the bees or some agent transfers pollen from the anthers over in the scanther column right here from the male to the female. And these are the stigmatic lobes, and you can see that these bees have had to have been to the male because they got pollen all over them. And due to some studies I did in West Tennessee where these pictures were taken, this was in Brownsville and this was near Dyersburg. And the idea is you need about 350 pollen grains to generate a nice fruit substantially. And you can probably get away with it less than that. I tried doing all kinds of counting in cages with I looked like the Orkin Man. You know that little commercial where I had on headset with a loop hanging out here, and I was holding a hand lens, and I had flashlight magnifier, you know, and to try to count pollen grains and put them on the plants to pollinate them. And I think you could probably get a fruit to stay on with 50 grains, but another way to look at this is every seed you have in that fruit that's whole and perfect and looks great required 1 pollen grain. So you can look at it from the reverse. Take one of those zucchinis, let one of them, it's easier if you do it this way, let one of them go into one of the great big old logs, then cut it apart and have a party. It could be a family adventure and count seeds in that thing. Even more fun would be a watermelon spitting contest or something to that effect, where you count, it's the same kind of thing. You know, if you've got, 1 pollen grain, 1 seed, give you an idea of what you have. This guy had just a really neat, small, but it was kind of like he had things coming off as you went in the season. He had little plots, but something was always coming on, so it wasn't too much for him to take care of, which was a really neat idea. And he rotated a whole lot, which is another good thing for organic farming to do. Rotating things rather than not having the same thing and have the same pest problem. You rotate it out and get rid of that problem to what you're doing. And he's had this little acreage thing here compared to a challenge of a 55 to 60 acre field of zucchini on a pivot irrigation system. And but that guy had a brand new Corvette in his driveway. He was doing all right, okay, in West Tennessee. And his brother had hogs next door, and I'd never seen hogs pollinate, and that was an interesting experience. Did I say that? Yeah, I guess I did. Whoops, it's going. Okay, I had these slides in there too. All right, back up a second. Oh, it's not doing what I want it to do. Hold on a sec. Let's just go with it, because I showed you those slides anyway. If flowers are restaurants, then what are bees to flowers? They're all of these. I'm going to talk about all those things except one. You can figure that out. But anyway, now I'd just like, just have a little fun with this and say, if they are restaurants, then what are bees? Well, they are hungry, they're thirsty, they're robots, they're sometimes fooled, they're pollinators, and they're partners. It's a very coadaptive relationship. If you compare flowers to restaurants, what do they have? They both offer food. The bees need nectar as a carbohydrate, so do we, okay, and they use pollen as their protein, and we need other proteins as well. They both advertise to attract. So I'd like to propose that flowers are really signs to bees. It's an advertisement. And restaurants use signs to attract people. Okay. Mick Jagger had one of these on a poster that said, "Got milk." I just thought "got pollen" was appropriate. But anyway, the purpose of flowers. Advertisement to attract a pollinator, and in what? They're visual, and in many different ways, by color, also by texture, because it affects a whole lot of light reflection. If you've got a real hard surface, it reflects light a lot different than a carpeted surface would absorb a lot, right? You look at the surface texture of petals sometimes and compare them. Some are shiny, some are translucent, some are like little windows that are almost clear. And how flowers do this, I don't know. I'm not a flower, but it's an interaction to attract a pollinator. If it wasn't successful, it wouldn't have that trait. So they can also, what you've got to remember too in this process is they see ultraviolet. They don't see red. They have trichromatic vision like we do, but instead of red, they have UV. We have red, green, blue. And so we're only guessing what they see in the nectar guides. And they also can detect differences in form, depth, and shape. It's like they'd see the differences in those petals from far away. And then maybe an odor as they got closer would become a very important attractant to them. And bee colors are a lot of the colors that are yellow, blue, and white are very attractive to bees. Many bees. And I would add red too, because I think like the Salvia coccinea there is a beautiful plant, and it reseeds itself a whole lot, and a very good nectar source for honeybees and many other bees. And the Salvia, the other one over here, the blue one, it's probably pratense, but something similar. And you look at this, another positioning thing that plants do, because plants are rather interesting because they can be male first and then female, and alternate that. Or they can have both sexes at the same time. But if they have separate sexes, that promotes outcrossing, which genetically is a better strategy in the long term. But this one has an interesting position, because this is the kind of flower that has a bottom set of petals, keel arrangement, to where the reproductive parts of the plant are up here. The stigma, when it's female, the stigma is sticking out like this. When it's male, the anthers are sticking out. Often, you can see some of the different ages in the plants if you look at where they are positioned on the stem. They're immense. So you're going to look down lower, and some of these plants will be in a female stage actually, and as you go up, they'll get male because they're male first. Okay, so it sounds as it goes up. So and a lot of bees tend to move around, do this when they're going up a flower. Watch them next time. Especially bumblebees, they're easy to see how they do that. But the anthers are positioned in a place where if it's in the male stage, then the bee, as it visits the flower, sticks its tongue to try to get into the flower. This part serves as a landing platform for the bee. If you looked in the middle of that flower, you'd have a little dark blue area, almost like an arrow pointing to where the food is. Tongue goes down there. The weight of the bee causes it to bend forward, and the keel pops over and hits the bee right behind the neck, the head area, and basically in the thorax, and deposits the pollen. Okay, now it goes to a flower that's in the female stage. Guess where the stigma is? Same exact spot. So it hits popped on one, goes another one, gets popped again, and you got pollination. Is that cool or what? Maybe I'm easily amused, but that always amused me. And this is henbit, and it's out. It's starting to fade now, but it's a little blue flower you see everywhere. It's very attractive. It's bright red pollen. You go, if you're a beekeeper and look at your colonies, they got bright red pollen, dark red orange. That's henbit.
Is that a mid-family?
Yeah. Yeah, it's smaller, but it's all over the place. And there are two species of it that you can get. One that's a little bit longer, has a longer stem. Pardon?
One spreads across one faster than the other, right? And
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I was just joking around because my lawn is covered with that stuff, right?
Okay, well, I like it if it's beef food. I tend to mow around it. I have a weird mowing pattern, and I do live out in the country, so they can lump it if they don't like it, you know. And most of my neighbors know I got bees anyway. But if I got an area of clover that I don't mess with, and it's over near a ditch area, I'd let that go. Bachelor's button's coming up now, and they don't produce much food for bees, but I like them because they're pretty, so I don't cut those down. And then I get clover coming up around the area, and I look at my grass, so occasionally I'll see a patch of clover. I'm looking to see if bees are on. Whoop, can't go there. There's a bee there. So I might boogie around the other side. Now this is our straight tree. The tulip poplar can produce some really good nectar. And it's a real dark red-brown, so that one that's a little bit darker up there has probably got tulip poplar in it. We'll open those up a little bit later on, pass them around so you can see compare if they taste any different. And now you have to have a clean finger, and I don't want to get the safety people on me, so that'll be up to you if you choose to do that. Okay? All right. But this is what we call protogynous, not protandrous. Protandrous means it's male first. The tulip poplar is female first. So this is already spent, and the pollen, if you look close at this thing, you'll see that some of these have a slit, and you can see some grains of pollen on it. It's not really easy to see right here, and there's some pollen down here that have already been knocked off by bees visiting the flower. They've gone for the nectar down here, and pollen just got in the way. They're not thinking like a human. Okay, they're not a little human. Remember that, they're an insect. Often us beekeepers, we anthropomorphize them fantastically. I'm guilty as anybody because it's the easiest way to explain to somebody, but they're like little robots. They respond to stimulus. It's a stimulus and a response. And I always ask you to go back to the fundamentals of where you're thinking something is doing something. Why is it doing it? It's responding to a stimulus. Visual, tactile, olfactory, whatever. But the flower provides all those things, and plus a food reward. And all those colors and textures and everything reinforce the food. If you took the food reward away from tulip poplar, the bees would quit. They would quit visiting it. They would only be fooled so long, and they would quit. They wouldn't go back. So you've got to have the food reward to continue to attract the pollinator. That's kind of an ugly sign, but if you're interested in eating Chinese, it's Chinese characters, and I don't know if you can read that in Chinese, I can't, but it's bright colors, red, yellow. And this is on the strip. And I got this idea while I was out foraging one day. I didn't know what I wanted to eat. And I was grossed out by all the signs that they're on Kingston Pike in the Bearden area, was where this is coming up on Paper Mill. But anyway, you're going this way, and you got we're foraging. Okay, we look for the Arby's hat. We look for Applebee's apple. We look for, and what do some of these things have in common? And I thought, well, they're brightly colored. They're yellow, they're red, they're something that we would notice. And then, so you, and if you after you get looking at it for a while, you may associate it with it, and then you remember where it is. I was trying to get out of the way of a truck right there because there's a McDonald's right here. I mean, I wanted to take a picture of McDonald's. I think I did it later on, but I did get Chick-fil-A where they've got the little C with a comb on top, like a chicken. So if you're hungry for Chick-fil-A, that might appeal to you. If you're a bee, you might be, this is a banquet table for you. This is in the Baca Valley in California, where I did a lot of my work. And all these little dark objects on these heads they're primarily honeybees, but also some native bees. And some of them have quite a few bees all over them. And where the bees are is where the nectar is. You're not seeing them on some of the real outside. It blooms from the outside in. So it's only producing nectar in the younger stages. And these are male sterile. There's no pollen here. So intermittently throughout this thing, I was studying how far apart could you put male rows and get a full set of the steriles to get the bees to spread out. And and so I enjoyed the work, but the males are a little smaller heads, which have a bunch of pollen. I'll show you a picture of one of those. This is a male sterile with the big outside ray petals that are very attractive at a distance. Bees get closer, and the odor comes in amazingly. And then just reinforcement of that nectar. After it's been there the first time, they're going to remember it. The color of the corollas of the petals, the individual florets, all these can have the capability of producing an individual seed, sometimes up to about 1,500, 2,000 seed anyway. They bloom from the outside in, and where the bees are, this row here is producing the nectar. These out here are not producing nectar. To figure that out, I put a cork borer in and I centrifuged the plugs and figured out that that's where the bees weren't going where there isn't any food. I like this picture because where does your eye go? Right down the pipe. And what's right down the pipe? The anthers with pollen all over them. The bee has, or a butterfly or whatever, this is a morning glory. And your eye shoots in there, so would the bee. This is one of those, if you look at the back of this morning glory, a little bit lower, it has kind of like windows that it makes it even shines forward in a way. So that's another adaptation of that flower. Color, vision, texture, everything. That's crimson clover. We're going to actually, there's an area plot out here that we're going to take advantage of them having that. And I'm going to go ahead and put a row of wildflowers right down the middle of it and see what that does to it. I'm certain it'll look pretty, if nothing else. And then we're going to see what kind of things come up in these wildflower mixes we're going to plant. There's the truck that almost got me. I wasn't lying, but I did get the sign. All right, now here I ask you just to bear with me now. I said, well, we're comparing flowers to restaurants. Now, I told you flowers had nectar guides. Well, I think that these are French fry guides right here. Okay, doesn't that look like a French fry? If you really want a French fries, okay, never mind. I know they're not good for us. Neither are Dunkin' Donuts, but how many people eat them? Oh, yeah. But anyhow, if you're hungry for that, pink, bright colors, something that we're going to look at and we're going to notice. We remember. Chick-fil-A. And this is a picture in a sunflower field, as you can see, but this is what it looks like without a UV filter that lets UV through. Then when I put a filter on the lens and took the same shot, it looked like this. So it's a little bit different, and this is what the bee sees. But to us it looks red. Whether the bee can see it as red, I don't know, but there's a definite difference in contrast in the flower. And I like this shot better. This is Enothera, primrose. This is what we see. This is what we think the bee sees. Very neat. Red lobster. And the target sign, I think that one always attracts my eye. I can see that one from half a mile away. This is a bush honeysuckle, Lenicera, and again, it shows you an example of, well, the bee's trying to get in here to get at the pollen, which is at the base of the flower, but it can't help but run into the anthers that the quote plant is kind of put right in its way. And at the male stage, and then in the female stage, you would have the anthers would no longer be producing pollen, but the stigma would be receptive. And here's the male sunflower, to where technically they're male first and then they're female. The female, with the stigmatic loads inside, pushes the pollen out of the tube, kind of like a toothpaste tube. Then it spreads apart. It's not receptive until it spreads apart, but then it's no longer male, it's female. And you have all the different prunus type plants, and some of these, the petals will actually turn colors after they've been pollinated. And it's kind of a signpost to the bee, don't waste your time. You're already done, go somewhere else. And I think that's a neat idea. Petros, you've got to have chili and chips. And there's another banquet. Anybody know what that is? Uh-huh. Yeah, black locust. What a banquet table. And all those individual pea-like flowers produce a whole lot of nectar. Very prolific source of the bees taking the nectar and making it into a honey that's really nice, very light colored, and it has slight greenish tint, but it's delicious. Really good source of nectar. Has your typical pea-like flower. That's a lousy shot, but I included it because I just wanted to throw it in as basswood. We don't have as much native basswood around here as they do in the in the east. I went to Vermont a couple years ago to do some beekeeper talks, and I worked with a professional beekeeper up there, and he gave me some of the coolest basswood honey in a comb. It's very water white in color and has a nice flavor, but it's like one of those kind of things where when you have a tree of basswood in full flower, you can hear it. And the first basswood I ever saw, and I don't know, I'm from Ohio, I guess I just didn't see basswood there, was in Jackson, Tennessee. I was staying in a motel room, and I heard what I thought was a swarm of bees. I went inside the back and investigated. It was a tree that was just loaded so much, it was just the bees were just making so much racket. And I had a tree book with me, so I figured out it was a basswood tree, and I'd never seen one before. So, but it was pretty neat. Now, why anybody would buy anything from these kind of guys, I don't know. But to me, that's more of an antagonistic thing rather than attractant. But I took a picture anyway. I guess it antagonized me enough to take a picture. And if the parking lot's full, maybe it's a pretty good place to eat. There's another characteristic. I mean, I don't know. Buckwheat. This produces a very dark, full-flavored honey. It has 3 different kinds of flowers. There are 3 different kinds of flowers in that picture. Some with long anthers, or you botanist, I have to define myself more professionally. Filaments of the anther are long versus short. So they have little shorties or longies, and then the stigma can either be long or short, the style, either long or short, and some that are exact same height, all in the same branch. That's what I get for going to Ohio and helping somebody out in a field day. They put me out in a field and when I had buckwheat, and I'd never seen buckwheat. Jim too did that to me. And so I go out there and I'm looking at this stuff and trying, what am I going to tell these people about this? And then I started looking at these flowers. Well, I can tell them about that. They're a different kind of plant. And then they only produce a certain time of day, and then they only produce nectar for a limited time. And so if you are a person like a grower, you want to make sure you go out when the bees are there. You're thinking, hey, these bees aren't even visiting this. You'll miss it entirely. Maybe 2 or 3 hour period is when they bloom. Some in the morning, some in the afternoon. And that produces the nectar. And the rest of the time, they shut down. So the bees know when to go. And they don't go there when there's no food, because they have that time sense as well. And there's billboards you can look at, that are, I don't know, they can be attractants, and you go closer and closer, and no, we didn't go in. Anyway, this magnolia is a very common plant in Tennessee, and it's one of these same, it's protogynous. Female first, and then the anthers open later to prevent selfing. This is one that you might find more interesting because it's a nice little story. And it's everywhere I see blueberries, I've seen this interaction, which is kind of neat. And especially now, this is with rabbit eye blueberries, because you can have high bush, low bush, and rabbit eye. And we're seeing some more high bush in Tennessee now, and some of those, the flowers are big enough for the bee to walk right into, so this wouldn't apply as much to them. This is concerned rabbit eye. But the normal pollinator is a bumblebee. There are certain crops, the bumblebees are superior pollinators to honeybees simply because they are buzz pollinators. They can shiver their wing muscles and change the frequency of the pitch to release pollen from the anthers. This is like a little bell. It kind of sits down like this, and if my finger's like these are the anthers inside the bell. And when the bee goes and shivers its wing muscles, you hear it before you even see the bee. Zzz. When you hear that change in pitch, it kind of like opens up the pores like a little salt shaker opening up, and the pollen just kind of comes out. Now the bee's hanging up like this, venters, so the hairy body of the bee is getting pollen all over its ventor. Okay. Now, and blueberries are the same type deal. They're male first, and then they're female. But you need to plant different cultivars to have cross-pollination with these. So you can't just plant all one cultivar and have it cross. That won't work. You have to have different bushes of different kinds. And there are many different, there are probably a dozen or 15 or so different species. So as this bee goes and buzz pollinates the thing, this shows you a bumblebee doing its tongue is long enough to get the nectar that's up here. And this is the regular way that the plant intended, okay? Enter the carpenter bee. Carpenter bee comes along, and these all show you pictures of bumblebees doing their thing, and this one has a pretty substantial pollen load on it right here. So it's been actively collecting that pollen. Now the carpenter bee comes along, it's got a little short tongue, but it's sharp. It perforates a hole right at the base to get nectar right here because it can't go the regular way. And although they can buzz pollinate, they normally do this. Now the honeybee figures my tongue's not long enough to get the goodies this way, so I'm gonna go side saddle and stick my tongue in the perforation hole that the carpenter bee made. And I've seen this interaction time and time again, and it's like, then the question was, because if you look now, you go out in your blueberries and you look and see if you see little slits on them like this, where you can see necrotic areas where the tissue is darkened. That's where a carpenter bee has punched a hole there. And does that mess things up? No, I don't think so. It doesn't seem to damage the ovaries. There's enough seed production there that the blueberries develop fine, even though they've been perforated. And it may help to promote and get the pollen moving around as well. Honeybees also can benefit because they're simply so numerous. If the bumblebees have already released the pollen, and if pollen is sitting on the surfaces of the plant and the flowers, then any honeybee that's going on the surface can also move pollen. And like these little like dauber of the bell is the stigma sticking out the entrance. Question?
So you got 3 bees going to that one flower,
Yeah, potentially. Mm-hmm.
and unlike other flowers that can many bees go to the same flower?
Sure.
at a time?
Sure. And it may take more than one visit by one bee to the flower. What would that depend on? I'll throw it out to you. Give you a little quiz. How many visits would depend on what? No. How much pollen? How much pollen is that bee carrying when it's going from one flower? If it's just visited, say a male, got a whole bunch of pollen on it, then it goes to a female, it's liable to have a lot of pollen, and maybe that one bee will set that fruit. Okay, but if it's got a little bit, maybe it requires 10 visits, 10 different bees with small amounts to total up the cumulative effect of X number of pollen grains, depending on your crop and depending on your cultivar. And it's not all black and white. We don't know everything about it. I'm sorry, I had to have that because I had to give a talk, and I don't think I'm going to bother showing you this one. Oh, why not? I'm going to go quick through this. I don't want to put you to sleep. I'm not here to put you to sleep. It's just, this is kind of a nice little interaction too, and it's something we've been involved with. Because you say, well, honeybees and dogwoods, you got to be kidding. How many of you people have watched honeybees on dogwoods? Has anybody ever seen a honeybee in a dogwood? Not too many. Okay, that's a hint here. I call Mark Dogwood Wyndham because I owed him a little bit, and I had to pay him back on this slide. So, okay, I call it this. It's a dogwood breeding program. I call it fooling the bees. Okay, and where we use cages, and we put potted cultivars of 2 different dogwoods. One is resistant to one disease, one resistant to another, dogwood anthracnose and powdery mildew. They have different colored bracts. So one's white bract, one's pink bract. Okay, and we want the bees to cross the pollen from one to the other to set fruit so that we can generate a hybrid that is resistant to both. So that was our purpose here. So we have these potted trees, we put in screen cages. We put in a nucleus or a small colony of honeybees that had lower population numbers, had some food in it, little pollen, but we wanted the bees to forage for pollen in here. And to back up a little bit, and I'll go through this rather quick. Everybody's pretty much aware of the value of dogwoods. We have the Dogwood Arts Festival. It's a beautiful plant. It's a huge nursery crop. We are the biggest producer of dogwoods, state of Tennessee, and they produce a lot of food for wildlife, beneficial on those lines. But they cause these problems with anthracnose and powdery mildew. Look like symptoms like this, not a very healthy looking dogwood. We have these 2 cultivars that we discovered that had the 2 different kinds of resistance, and our overall goal was to produce one that was resistant to both. The thing about dogwood pollination, though, it's probably a native bee pollinated thing. Honeybees are not much interested because there's not enough nectar. Honeybees need nectar to produce surplus so they can go overwinter and make honey. It's mostly pollen. And sometimes you will find honeybees on it going for pollen. One of my students has subsequently, Paul, has studied dogwood pollination and found it's pollinated by two families of small bees, Halictidae, the sweat bees, and the mining bees, the andrenids. The flower of a dogwood actually isn't these bracts. The colored bracts are actually leaves. They serve as petals, if you will. But it's like a little composite head where flowers, and there may be 20 or so flowers in this head that synchronously bloom over a 10-day to 2-week period, depending on weather. That's the way they open. And so we put these in here, and this is Nayland Drive over here. And we got a lot of curiosity seekers running around there, so we put a pseudo-electric fence around. It wasn't attached to anything, but we never had a problem with people getting in the cages, so maybe that helped. But it would stimulate the bees to move and go and back and forth, and amazingly so, the bees did it. They went from one colored bract to the other, got food reward in both, and you can see some pollen loads on some of these bees' hind legs where they're collecting dogwood pollen, and we were successful. And we're trying to find out now, we're getting real close to finding out if the progeny from these seeds are going to be resistant to both diseases. So hopefully there will be, and we'll have a new resistant line of dogwoods with the UT name on it. And the honeybees helped. Yay, go bees. That was the end. The other end. Oh, that's my backyard. This is salvia, some things in my backyard. This is a salvia cochineus and some other flowers we have. And let's see, how are we doing on time? You don't know. Your clock's over there. Well, let me get it for you. Is that your? Is this your clock? Uh-huh. Okay, I'll give you that. I'm ready to walk around anyway. So that's a few things about basically looking at CCD and looking at pollination. And then what I'd really like you to do, though, I'm going to look at your handout with you. And you can read all this, so I'm not going to read for you. You read is probably better than I do. But the idea, did everybody get one of these? Anybody not have them? Hold on. Put your hands up one more time. Okay. And the people that did these pictures did a good job on a lot of the photography. Is really nice. Oh, you want to hand them out? Great. Thanks. Thanks, Michael. The picture on the front is Bombus rufus cinctrus, and it's visiting a raspberry. And it's a western bee. And the first section, it goes through basically farming with pollinators, and it gives you how it talks about native pollinators can increase crop yields. Basically, as it says right here, that there's a lot of native bees, and there are a number of crops that benefit many of these things. All the cucurbit crops, watermelon, squash, pumpkin, cantaloupes, all those. All the berries, even tomato, because it's a buzz-pollinated crop. Bumblebees especially are very valuable for that, as they are for eggplant and other solanaceous plants. And they're really, it's important. And you can buy colonies of bumblebees. You can actually promote them by basically not tilling the ground, by not poisoning a nest if you find one. We got a call today, and I've got to do some fast talking because somebody in Extension told them to take care of the bees in another way that I would rather not have them do. So we're going to correct that, and I like to promote them. Last year I had a colony that I got out of a birdhouse in a senior center in Sevierville, which was we had as a little colony ourselves in our lab to see what they are. They're a very efficient pollinator. Bee for bee, they're a better pollinator than honeybees are, but they're specific to certain crops. The sheer numbers of honeybees make them the best managed pollinator that there is. But why ignore the benefits of having native pollinators? You shouldn't. And so this talks about a number of things. And also, if you go to the Xerces Society website, they have Farming for Bees and this Pollinator Conservation Handbook. Both of those are good books. Would have additional information if you're interested. Now, the next publication that was passed out, it talks about organic farming practices. And to kind of summarize that, a lot of this you can read. It's pretty good. The table on page 2, the impact of common organic farming practices on pollinators. And that kind of summarizes a lot of what's in this publication in more detail. You have, and what I mentioned earlier, primary tillage, which means really tilling the heck out of the ground to start before you start anything else. If you have native bee beds, a lot of these native bees nest in tunnels in the ground that they start with an opening and may go down and spread off into several burrows, or the bees are nesting in the ground. So if you till it, you're going to disrupt their nests. So obviously you don't want to do that. My solution to that would be areas where if you had to till, then till. But look first to see if you have a bunch of native bees flying around. I mean, that sounds like common sense, but often we don't do it. You can look, you see them flying in decent weather like today, where it's about 50 to 60 degrees and sunshine. Native and nesting bees in the ground, you'll see them going in and out, a lot of activity. And it's actually pretty easy to observe. So leave some of that area. If you can't leave all of it, leave some of it, so you have a certain number of those nests in there, and they're going to benefit your pollination. Mm-hmm.
Question? The little tiny sweat bees, my yard is covered with them. I can hear them in the yard.
You can hear them. Are they talking to you?
Yes, they do.
What are they saying?
They're saying, they're in our territory, so I wear long pants and long shirt, and so like a farmer should. Anyway, my question is, if you see that kind of activity, does that mean that there could be other bees that would be there?
Sure.
Or are they unique in their habitat?
Yes and yes. That makes it more complicated. Because some bees will nest in yard situations or areas where there's a cover, where you've got a certain amount of shade. They're protected as well. And they're harder to see. And some bees that are very, very prolific, I've already got 4 calls for beds. One took over some guy's yard in West Knoxville. He's all excited about it, of course, until I told him he had a wonderful resource and convinced him not to nuke them anymore. He'd already tried to kill them with diazinon, 7, malathion, and something else, and he couldn't do it. He didn't kill them yet, so I said, hey, why don't you just enjoy them? They're only going to be active for about a month. And then, but still, part of our job is education for those places where you find that's a resource. And yet the soil and the conditions were just right for those bees, which are an Anthophora. It's what they would call, I guess, that would be a minor bee. They don't really have a real good common name. But they make little turrets in the ground in soft soil that's fairly easy to dig. And when you see them, when the soil is right, you'd see in this square foot here, you'd have 7,000 holes where you guys are sitting, and little tumuli, and little female would be in there. They nest together. They're gregarious, nesting together, but they're not social beyond that. They don't help with cooperative brood care like bumblebees or honeybees or ants or termites. But they basically, that individual female is responsible for taking care of that. They provision one time, so they're not progressive provisioners, but it's still important, and they're there. And if you can avoid, disturbing that ground, leave that, then you've got an additional resource. I don't know anything about flame weeding, so I can't address that. Hand weeding obviously is something that can be done, real physical. It's kind of like, reminds me of the old, okay, here's part of the biological control. You put a pest between two bricks, like that, and then you haven't contaminated anything, right? You've killed the pest. Or you pick them off, put them in a jar. I mean, I remember that doing a kid doing that with Japanese beetles. And they also are a real interesting fishing bait. The bluegill and brim really love the Japanese beetles. They'll really go after them. So you can have fun with other things as well, but we won't go there either. So hand weeding is a possibility, but hoeing is okay, but how much do you hoe? I mean, plastic mulch can be detrimental. If you're putting it right over a bee bed with this dense number of bees, then that's the wrong place to put it. If you can possibly, put it where they're not there. If you have to use plastic mulch. Floating row covers, don't know much about that. Fruit bagging is done in some areas for high value crops, might be a possibility. Classic biological control can be good or bad, depending on what it is you're trying to control and what you're using to control it. And that's something you're going to have to read more of the details. It's taken me a long time to try to explain that better. Conservation biological control would be you're trying to attract beneficials by planting crops that would be diverse enough to bloom consistently over a period of time to provide food, also provide cover, habitat, and for them to, say, these could be predatory insects, that you've got a crop, it could promote basically ladybird beetles, ladybugs, that would eat aphids on your crop. And maybe you'd plant a row or two of these what you would call, these would be actually beneficial crops planted down the middle or side grass into a crop to create areas where you're increasing your population of beneficials, both pollinators and parasitoids and predators. Crop rotation, I think, is good. Have something too long in one place, you're going to find the pests can find it. Trouble with things like squash borers and other things like that. If you keep the crop in the same thing, you're going to have more trouble because you're going to basically, your pests are going to find the crop and they're going to be there as well as everything else. Trap crops is what I was saying. Trap crops too are the reverse. They're not to promote beneficials. They're basically to basically encourage all the pests to go over on something that you don't really want. But get them out of your high dollar value crop, your target crop that you're wanting to make money on, and put them over into something else that is not as valuable but provides food for the something that would. But then you have to have the knowledge to know, well, what is that? Sanitation, resistant varieties, sticky traps, these are all possibilities. Sticky traps will attract bees too. So that's I would say a concern because a lot of them are done in put yellow cards, blue cards. So some of your beneficials can sometimes get into those. I like the idea of using the pheromone traps, mating disruption. And I think we're going to see them, and I'd like to develop more things on cover crops, especially if it's something that is pollinated. So you're getting a benefit by its cover crop, keeping weeds down, it's producing food, and maybe it's something you can even harvest. Maybe you plan wildflower plantings in such a way you might have a cut flower crop. I don't know if any of you considered or do any kind of tours in your farms. This is a very popular thing nowadays, of inviting people out to see, putting nice things that look good, and you can have a demo garden and your own area and charge a fee for people to walk around and look at what you've done and help other people in the same process. You'll find too, if you get into programs where you get to be a teacher, master gardeners, I do a master bee course, and you're going to find you're going to learn it much better if you have to try to explain it to somebody else, right? You're going to go, what? Well, I got to learn this stuff now. But it's okay. It's all right. I certainly don't know everything there is to know about this. I'm trying to learn more and try to stay ahead of some of you. And I don't know if I'll ever catch up with some of you, but it's all right. Additional things that you may be aware of too are, look at this, the fact sheet on organic approved pesticides. You need to be aware of what kind of things can you use to do organic. And this is really helpful, and I'm not going to go over every piece of this. But what I want to draw your attention to in the table on page 2 of that pub is look at how many things are highly toxic. And these are things that are common organic approved pesticides can be pretty toxic to pest pollinators. So it doesn't matter if it's, quote, organic or not. If it has an active ingredient that can kill a pollinator, then it's potential. If you spray a pollinator with insecticidal soap, it'll kill it. Okay? I'd rather see you doing that than spraying some other kind of chemical. But it's not all cut and dried. You have to decide what do you need to control, what's the best way. And I would ask that you think about the effect on pollinators before you make the decision to what to use to treat. And if you have a choice, go for a low tox or non-toxic. I mean, choose a non-toxic first, then go to low toxic. And if you really have to do it, then try to do it when the bees are not foraging, if you can determine that. Most bees are not, if you do something at really late dusk when the bees are home, you're not seeing bee activity, or very early in the morning before sunup for sure. Some of the native bees get up really early though, so you've got to be aware. Squash bee gets up before we do, and it's out there while I can't hardly see. I'm tripping across the rows, and those darn squash bees are there. How they see with that low light, I don't know. But you've got to be observant on your own property and see what's happening there. And then try to time it. If you have to use something highly toxic, do it when your pollinators aren't active. You had a question.
Yeah, 2 questions. The fungicides, daffodil,
Mm-hmm.
what you're supposed to spray regularly on your peach trees. Does it have any of these ingredients like the sulfur, the copper sulfate? And how would I know that? Does the label tell me that?
Yes. I'd read your label real carefully. And even under areas where it doesn't say active ingredients. Active to who? Active for what?
Okay.
See what I mean? Because a lot of times you can, your target thing that you're going to spray, there are certain chemicals like this fluvalinate that controls the mites that beekeepers can buy buy it cheaper at labeled for something else entirely. The problem is some of those things that are labeled for something else may have some soap in there as a sticker that's intended to go on leaves, not in a beehive. Okay, so they may be adding, what's hurting their bees isn't the chemical per se, as much as I like to stay away from. It could be an supposedly inactive ingredient. But you got to consider what's your target, what are you trying to control. And some insecticides do not have enough information on them if they are toxic to pollinators. This is some of the first information I've seen on it. And we are looking at studies, we're part of the grant I'm talking about, both with native bees and honeybees, some of the newer formulations of pesticide, which data is not available on, and we're trying to get all that. Especially these neonicotinoid insecticides like imidacloprid, which are very commonly used by many homeowners. We want to determine, well, what are some of the toxic effects? Because they're systemics. They're picked up through the roots of the plant, and the roots of a plant are basically a pipeline. They're a water and sugar pipeline. So what happens when, are the chemicals then coming through the nectar and the pollen, and then the bees are taking the nectar and making it into honey, and are they magnifying a problem, or could they be causing a problem? So there are studies underway where we're doing controlled feeding of bees, these different compounds, to find out. There used to be people that did a lot of work with toxicology in bees, and they retired. And not too many people have taken over to pick up the slack, and so we're trying now to educate some young blood to get in there and find out the facts on some of these new materials. And the chemical companies are, and they're not, I'm not poo-pooing them necessarily. Some of them are very interested and concerned that they know, so they can put it on the label appropriately so that people will know when they use the product what is the risk for pollinators. Okay? If we don't know, then we don't put it on. So that's why we need research in some of these areas, and especially in some of these new compounds, to find out that they're not going to harm beneficials like pollinators.
So if it's dry on there, did fungicide in the morning, by afternoon when the bees come, is it less likely?
There's a problem if you're using dust that the bees may think it's pollen.
It's not dust,
They may pick it up.
so it's wet, that's right.
It's okay, but it dries out. Yes,
And then it'll make a,
yes, and no, and maybe. Things that are pesticides that you use, if you have to use a pesticide like 7, if you use the SLR form, it has a sticker. It sticks tighter to the leaves, and the bees are less liable to come in contact with it. But anyway, what's important is, though, that you keep current on some of these new, and some of this information this just came out. This is brand new stuff, and I think it's neat. And I'm trying, like I said, I'm trying to stay ahead of you guys. At the same time, read it carefully and think about it as if you were a bee. And then maybe you might come up with another idea. And maybe, like, you've got a table like that one, can help you out to decide, well, if I really have a problem with that pest, is it bad enough that I have to treat? Realize what you can do to your pollinators if you do.
There's no, I mean, we're talking organic, so we could use pesticides.
Right, but let's go back again. Look at that table. The title of the table is Toxicity of Common Organic Approved Pesticides.
Yeah, but it still bothers me because I don't.
Right, it should. I'm not sweeping that under the rug, but whether it's approved organic or not, you've got to consider what will it do. Okay, you've got another one on tunnel nests. I'm glad you included that. And Michael, you want to talk about that here or over at the? Let's go outside when we talk about that. Okay, Michael's going to talk about tunnel nest and making and. Oh boy, Michael, this is a whole good area for you. We've got examples over there too, including the Logan Bee Male Shelter, which we don't have here for you, but it's on the E-Extension website if you so get into it. It kind of looks like the picture of the shelter on page 4 of tunnel nest for native bees. And we've determined that, you know, the original thing was set on a pole, and that tends to get unwieldy and may fall with soil conditions the way they are, depending on how you got to pound the post in. So it almost works as well to put it on 2 cement blocks. But this is good information for you to go over and see if native bees are for you. Because a lot of these things are available. You can purchase nesting blocks or drill your own wood and tubes for native bees. And then, okay, the one that I looked at next, it's called Plants for Native Bees. See if you can find that one. It's past the tunnels nest. Ed Ross was a good photographer. He took that picture of Melisodes, which is a bee that has pollen on its hind legs so much it shouldn't be able to fly, but nobody told the bee that. And then it's got lists of native plants and regular common garden plants that are planted, both for, to be bee friendly. And that's a good set of information right there. And that would be considered, a general thing for North America. And Tennessee would, most of the things on there, I'm not seeing a whole lot other than creosote bush. Creosote bush, I don't know what it would do here. I've seen it in Arizona. It may do fine. I better not say anything because I don't know. But I'm familiar with most of the rest of those plants, and they would all grow in Tennessee. And then the South Central, she included a few things. The South Central list gets some more specific, maybe expands a little bit, adds a few more than the overall list, and the Mid-Atlantic. And one of these days, I think we're going to have a Southeast. And that would be more appropriate specifically for here. But we are very, very fortunate in having the kind of conditions that we have a lot of the same plants as they do in the north and a lot of the southern plants. So we're very fortunate where we are and be able to grow many, many different kinds of things. It may not grow as well way down south for certain things, but we can grow most of what they can in the northern areas in Tennessee. So that's kind of an overview of a little bit about organic bees, pollination, beekeeping, and it's too much information. I realize it's a bit of overflow, but I wanted to give you something to stimulate you to learn more. I would hope that you go then to some of these websites and dig into them for your own specific things. And if you have questions of me, I'm going to get my card, or wait, our website's on there. If I've got enough cards, I'm just going to give you a card. And that way you can ask me questions. Well, they're here somewhere, but I can't find them. But write down this. My email address is jskinner@utk.edu. And if you come up with something later that's a burning question, be patient, because I just do not sit in my office waiting for you all to call. This time of year, I'm everywhere. Or I'm trying to be, like all of you. Thank you very much. We're gonna go over, let's take a break for a few minutes. Convene back here in about 10 minutes? That sound okay? And then we're gonna take a walk over to the bee yard, and I'm gonna put on a demonstration over there for you. And then Michael's gonna talk about a couple of other aspects. And if some of you have to leave now, it's certainly your choice. We'll be here for a while. Thank you.